Discover a beautiful land of enchanting castles, ancient cities, and long sandy beaches. Discover a dramatic history of visionary kings, brave explorers, and passionate leaders. Discover a people of proud traditions, strong faith, and genuine warmth. Discover an unforgettable country. International Video Network welcomes you on this video visits tour of Portugal, land of discoveries. Mainland Portugal lies at the far southwest corner of Europe on the western strip of the Iberian Peninsula. Portugal is bordered on the north and east by Spain. To the south and west is the Atlantic Ocean. Its borders were established in 1297, making it one of the oldest countries in Europe. Mainland Portugal is divided into 7 regions, each with its own individual landscapes, traditions, and charms. There are about 10 million people in Portugal. The vast majority are Roman Catholic. The capital and largest city of Portugal is Lisbon. Lisbon is located on the western coast of Portugal, where the Tagus River flows into the Atlantic. The history of Lisbon is engraved in the stones of its castles and its churches, its old houses and courtyards, its museums and innovative architecture. St. George's Castle sits upon one of Lisbon's legendary 7 hills. It is a symbolic link to the city's past. It was first used as a fortress during the Roman occupation in 200 BC and later as a Moorish citadel. Of all Lisbon's early inhabitants, the Moors had the most enduring impact. Their presence is still felt in the nearby Alfama, with its narrow winding streets, cobblestone squares, and iron balconies. The influence of the Moors is also evident in the azulejos, or decorated tiles that grace a large number of walls. They depict religious, mythological, or historical scenes. The National Azulejo Museum is located in the old monastery of Madre de Deus. Azulejo art continues to evolve and remains embedded in Portugal's culture. Modern artists have adapted a more contemporary style. Azulejos are produced and sold in many tile factories located throughout Portugal. At the Santana Tile Factory in Lisbon, traditional methods are used and each tile is still painted entirely by hand. Santana also produces other beautiful clay items. In 1147, Portugal's first king, Dom Afonso Henriques, conquered the Moors and brought Lisbon into the newly formed Portuguese nation. King Henriques had the Sé, or cathedral, built on the ruins of the Arab mosque in celebration of his victory. Its eclectic interior houses a Romanesque nave, Gothic chapels, and a Baroque choir. The city's greatest glory came in the 15th and 16th century, a period known as the Age of Discoveries. This age was ushered in by the 3rd son of King João I, Prince Henry the Navigator. A modern tribute to Prince Henry rises dramatically above the river in the Lisbon suburb of Belém, the monument to the discoverers. "35 years after Prince Henry's death, Manuel I ascended to the Portuguese throne. His reign from 1495 to 1521 proved to be one of the most glorious in Portuguese history. Vasco da Gama reached India. Pedro Álvares Cabral discovered Brazil. Magellan began his journey around the world, and many other explorers spread Portuguese culture to the far reaches of the globe. Under Manuel I, Portugal developed its national style of architecture called Manuelino. It is a blending of earlier Gothic and Romanesque influences, resulting in a style unique to Portugal. A prime example of Manuelino style is the Jerónimos Monastery in Lisbon. The monastery was conceived and planned by King Manuel I to honor the voyages of discovery. The south door of the monastery, richly decorated with religious sculptures, is widely acknowledged as the finest masterpiece of the Manuelino style. The monastery was named after the king's patron saint, Saint Jerónimo, whose symbol, the lion, appears throughout. Inside the church, the tombs of Vasco da Gama and the great national poet Camões lie here. Camões, who lived during the 16th century, wrote the epic poem Lusíada, which glorifies the discoveries. The Tower of Belém stands majestically along the banks of the river Tagus, across from the monastery. This fortress was built in 1515 to protect the seaward entrance of the Portuguese capital. King João V dominated the first half of the 18th century. During this period, Portugal prospered from the profits of the gold and diamond mines in Brazil. João V used this wealth to build the great Águas Livres aqueduct. Altogether, the aqueduct is over 40 miles long. It still brings drinking water to Lisbon today. In 1755, Lisbon was hit with a massive earthquake. The earthquake destroyed over 2/3 of the city. In the northern section of town, a rotunda bears the name of the man who led the city's reconstruction, Sebastião José de Carvalho, the Marquis of Pombal. He quickly and efficiently rebuilt modern-day Lisbon's downtown. This section of Lisbon runs from the square of Dom Pedro IV, or Rocio, south to the waterfront. People of all ages congregate here. On the north side of the square stands the stately National Theatre, the Dona Maria II, crowned with the statue of Gil Vicente, Portugal's first dramatist. In front of the theatre is one of two lovely fountains which also grace this square. Lisbon's main shopping and commercial district, the Baixa, is a grid of streets south of the Rocio. Many streets are closed to traffic, which allows performers to entertain the crowds. The Baixa's Rua Augusta leads to a 19th century triumphal arch, the entrance to the stately waterfront commercial square. It is known as Black Horse Square, after the statue of José I, which the Marquis of Pombal erected to honor his patron. The square is surrounded by 18th century government buildings, which include Lisbon's stock exchange. This site is where King Dom Carlos and his eldest son were assassinated in 1908. Their deaths led to the end of monarchy in Portugal. In 1910, Lisbon became the capital of a new republic. Fraught with political instability, it fell in a military coup in 1926. Antonio Salazar led the country for the next 40 years. His authoritarian rule kept Portugal isolated and prevented modernization. On April 25, 1974, a bloodless revolution occurred, paving the way for a new Portugal. This bridge on the Tagus was renamed the 25th of April Bridge in honor of this historic date. Modeled after the Golden Gate in San Francisco, it is the third largest suspension bridge in the world. It took 10 years before a stable government emerged after the revolution. Progress toward modernization began. In 1986, Portugal joined the European Economic Community. Peter Wise, a business journalist, describes the second phase of economic development.
Things began to change again in 1987 when, for the first time since the revolution, a government with a majority in parliament was elected. The majority gave the government the ability to implement some very broad reforms to change the way society had been run since the revolution. One of the major reforms that they've brought about is privatizing the companies that were nationalized under communist pressure in the wake of the revolution.
Privatization has made Portugal's industries more competitive and, coupled with increased foreign investment, has resulted in substantial economic growth. New buildings have sprung up everywhere, evidence of Portugal's economic progress. Innovative structures such as the Amoreiras, one of Europe's largest shopping and office complexes, and the BNU building have changed the face of Lisbon. The Bairro Alto section of the city is the center of Lisbon nightlife. From its narrow streets, the melancholic strains of Portugal's traditional music, called fado, can be heard.
Não há nada mais bonito. Não há nada mais bonito.
Lisbon's fado is sentimental and nostalgic. Their haunting lyrics and lamenting melodies are the true folk songs of the people.
Ai, o fado é sempre bem dito, mesmo cantado a chorar.
The singer is accompanied by a viola, a guitar, and the Portuguese guitarra, a 12-string descendant of the lute. Long inhibited by the government, the newfound freedom has caused a renaissance in the art world. Adorning a city square is one example of modern Portuguese art. It is called o cavaleiro, or lottery man. The artist, Fernanda Assis, was inspired by the colorful people who hawk lottery tickets. Laranjeira Santos, another contemporary artist, describes his work and his influences.
I don't think that I have been greatly influenced, but of course I have had my influences. In my youth it was Milão. You can still see that influence today in my work in the huge, round and highly polished forms. After perhaps Henry Moore, because I have a tendency to build my figures sitting with small heads and in a resting pose. The rest of the influences come from within.
Despite all the changes, Lisbon retains a leisurely old-world quality. Original 19th century trams are still a vital part of the city's transport system. The Santa Justa lift, a fanciful Gothic tower created by Eiffel himself, transports people from the Baixa to the Bairro Alto. Parks are scattered throughout the city. Edward VII Park, located at the top of the Avenida de Liberdade, is one of the most beautiful. Lisbon is rich in small cafes and restaurants busy from morning till late at night. The neighboring Atlantic Ocean provides an abundance of seafood dishes. Of all fish, bacalhau, or dried codfish, is the dearest to the Portuguese palate. The Portuguese have invented more than 365 ways to prepare it. Sardines cooked over charcoal grills are also very popular. Pork, chicken, and lamb are mainstays of the Portuguese diet. At the Hotel Tivoli, the resident chef prepares a traditional lamb dish, bife de lombo à portuguesa. Great pride is taken in preparation of the food and also in its presentation. To the Portuguese, dining, like life, is to be enjoyed and not rushed. Lisbon is a colorful place, especially during festival time. In June, the Festival of St. Anthony, Lisbon's patron saint, is observed. Groups from all over the country come to parade down Lisbon's main streets. The Costa de Lisboa region encircles the capital city of Lisbon. It is a region of romantic castles, dramatic rocky cliffs, and majestic palaces. A few miles northwest of Lisbon is Queluz. Queluz is famous for its royal palace. Built between 1758 and 1794, the palace was modeled after Versailles, just outside Paris. The palace and its gardens have an intimate charm. Westward from Queluz, toward the Atlantic, is the town of Cascais. For years, the rich and famous have been drawn to Cascais because of its beauty. However, the true spirit of the town is found in the local fishing community. Fishing methods have remained the same over many centuries. Returning after a day at sea, fishermen bring their catch to the central fish market auction.
Image 10 quilos, está 28, como é que não sei qual que são, você tem 50 metros.
There are several lovely churches in Cascais, including the 17th century Igreja de Assunção. In the center of the gilded altar stands a statue of Our Lady of Assumption, for which the church is named. The walls are decorated with 18th century azulejos, depicting events from the Bible. Heading north along the coastline, a rocky highland juts out, dropping abruptly 200 feet to the sea. The Cape of the Rock, the westernmost point of the continent of Europe. A lighthouse built in 1772 provides guidance for seafarers. The words of the 16th century Portuguese poet Camões evokes the seafaring country's heritage. Here is where the land ends and the sea commences. To the east is the romantic town of Sintra. Its lush woods and grand palaces inspired the English poet Lord Byron to describe the area as a glorious Eden. Sintra boasts 3 palaces. The oldest, the Castelo dos Mouros, is situated on 2 peaks of the Serra de Sintra. From the walls of this castle, there is a magnificent view of the old town. The centerpiece is the former royal palace, the Palacio Nacional. Most of the building dates back to the reign of King Manuel I, who enlarged the palace, enriching it with Manuelino decorations. Dominating the town from the top of the Serra de Sintra is the Palacio de Pena. This fairy tale-like palace dates back to 1839, when King Fernando adapted the ruins of an old monastery for use as a summer residence. The architect, Baron von Eschweg, helped create the king's grandiose vision. The result is a Bavarian castle adorned with Arabic minarets, Gothic towers, Manuelino windows, and a Renaissance dome. The portico of Triton is adorned with an extravagant Manuelino sea decoration. The Palacio de Pena stands as a classic example of Portuguese architecture from the Romantic period. Encircling the palace is Pena Park, one of the loveliest parks in Europe. North of Sintra is the small town of Mafra. The center of Mafra is dominated by a huge architectural masterpiece known as the Convento de Mafra. Erected in the 18th century, this building houses a basilica, convent, and palace. The facility took more than 50,000 workers and 18 years to complete. The centerpiece of this complex is a magnificent Baroque church. The interior is richly decorated with colorful marble, bas-relief, and 6 organs. The chimes of its famous carillon fill the air. The Costa de Prata, or Silver Coast region, bridges the gap between the Costa de Lisboa and the Costa Verde regions. It consists of the provinces of Estremadura and Beira Litoral. It is a land of age-old culture and miracles. Set high on a hill is the quaint town of Abidos. To pass through the town's double-arched gateway is to step back in time. Flowered balconies, whitewashed houses, and narrow cobblestone streets. Its medieval atmosphere is preserved so completely that Abidos is often referred to as a museum town. From its walls stretch a tapestry of weathered orange roofs. Only a medieval castle and an ancient aqueduct break the pattern. To the north, one of the most impressive monuments in Portugal rises unexpectedly from the countryside, the Santa Maria de Vitoria Monastery. Located in the town of Batalha, this massive and elaborate monastery is a masterpiece of Portuguese Gothic architecture. The front portal's Gothic arches sweep upward to a sculpture of Christ on the throne, surrounded by the 4 evangelists. The interior of the chapel is endowed with elegant vaulted ceilings. The Founder's Chapel contains the tombs of King João and Queen Philippa and their children, most famous of whom is Prince Henry, the Navigator. Located near Batalha is the world-famous Roman Catholic shrine Fatima. It is believed that on May 13, 1917, the Virgin Mary appeared to 3 peasant children who were tending their sheep. From all over the world, millions of pilgrims have since come here to pay homage to the Virgin Mary. Today, many of the faithful can be seen crawling on their knees to reach the basilica. Beside the basilica is the heart of the sanctuary, the Chapel of Apparitions. It was on this spot where the Virgin Mary is said to have made her appearance. North of Fatima, in the rolling green countryside, lie the ruins of a 1st century Roman town. Coimbra is the site of the largest excavated Roman ruin in Portugal. Remains of surprisingly large houses, stunning mosaic floors, public baths, and an aqueduct are all carefully preserved. A few miles farther, perched on a hill overlooking the river Mondego, is the university town of Coimbra. The university, established in 1290, is the oldest in Portugal. A statue of King João III, who brought the university to Coimbra from Lisbon in 1537, reigns from the center of the courtyard. The pride of the academic complex is the university library. Its 3 Baroque rooms are paneled in Brazilian ebony, trimmed in Oriental motifs, and lined with 100,000 gold-stamped rare books. Many of the university's traditions continue to be observed today. Some students can still be seen dressed in black capes, the traditional academic dress since the Middle Ages. The colorful ribbons identify the student's course of study. Dark blue signifies letters or languages. Slightly north of Coimbra is a mountain famous for its luxurious forest, Bucaco. This forest is the legacy of the Carmelite friars who built a monastery in the center of it in 1628. The presence of the friars helped to enrich the forest. They introduced maples, laurels, and Mexican cedars into the area, varieties brought back from Portuguese voyages to the New World. In the late 19th century, King Carlos chose to build a summer palace and hunting lodge here on the site of the old monastery. Its interior is elaborately decorated. Panels of azulejos depicting scenes from the famous Battle of Bucaco adorn the walls. In September 1810, the Portuguese-English forces under the command of Lord Wellington routed the French forces led by Marshal André Massena. This decisive defeat ended Napoleon's attempt to conquer Portugal. The palace, which has now been turned into a grand hotel, houses a large wine cellar containing the fine Bucaco wines. To the north, towards the coast, is a lovely town described as the Venice of Portugal, Aveiro. The comparison stems from crisscrossing canals found throughout the town. These canals flow into a vast lagoon that extends inland off the coast. These boats are used to gather seaweed for fertilizer. For centuries, fishermen here have harvested from the sea. Their daily catch is sold each morning in the local fish market. The Costa Verde region occupies the northwestern corner of Portugal and includes the provinces of Minho and Douro. This region, sometimes called the Green Coast, is a glittering emerald in Portugal's crown. The Minho province is a land rich in folklore, crafts, and traditional festivities. Its people are deeply religious and hard-working. The enchanting town of Viana do Castelo, near Portugal's northern border, best illustrates the province's charms. Viana reached the height of its prosperity through trade in the 16th century. And many of Viana's finest buildings date from that period. They surround the Praça da República, a most striking square which has in its center the chafariz, a fountain constructed in 1553. Facing the fountain to the east is the former town hall, a late 16th century Gothic structure. To the north rises the hill of Santa Luzia, crowned by a turn-of-the-century Neo-Byzantine church. The Basilica de Santa Luzia was fashioned after the Sacré-Cœur in Paris. South of Viana do Castelo is the small market town of Barcelos, Located by the river Cavado, it is known not only for its historical monuments, beautiful gardens, and weekly handicraft fair, but also as the home of the Portuguese symbol of good luck, the Barcelos cock. According to a 13th century legend, a condemned man said to a judge that a roasted cockerel would stand up and crow to prove his innocence. To the amazement of the judge, it did, and the man was set free. A 15th century monumental cross stands at the site of the miracle. The cross is located in the ruins of the Palace of the Dukes of Braganza, now an open-air archaeological museum. Barcelos has one of the biggest weekly fairs in the country.
Meu amor é de 7, com uma de graça, eu faço anos. E este vai para a senhora, 200 reais.
West of Barcelos, surrounded by rolling green hills, is the religious city of Braga. In the 12th century, Braga was designated as the seat of a newly created archdiocese. The archbishops were said to have greater power than kings. Their legacy, magnificent churches and palaces. They also infused a strong religious spirit into the city which can still be felt today. The city contains over 300 churches, and its chapels are constantly lit with votive candle offerings. Nearby shops sell a vast array of religious artifacts. The oldest and most famous church is the Sé. The Sé is an imposing edifice, its elaborate Gothic portico decorated with delicate columns. The medieval wing of the Archbishop's Palace serves as a backdrop to one of Portugal's beautiful gardens, the Jardim de Santa Bárbara. Braga's people are considered to be very religious. Their faith is prominently displayed during the festival in honor of the patron saint, St. John. This celebration takes place in June. The pivotal event is a procession where the image of the patron saint, along with other religious images, are carried through the city streets. A few miles from Braga is the religious retreat of Bom Jesus do Monte. The complex is composed of a monumental Baroque staircase leading up to a neoclassical church. The staircase is richly decorated and lined with chapels and fountains and topped with a lovely ornamental garden. The church itself is the work of the famous Braga architect Carlos Emerante. The interior is simple in design and formed in the shape of a Latin cross. Guimarães, a busy manufacturing town, lies at the foot of a mountain range southwest of Braga. This town was the first capital of Portugal. It is dominated by the 10th century castle, in which Afonso Henriques, the nation's first king, was born in 1110. Afonso was baptized in the lovely tiny church of St. Michael on the green in front of this castle. On June 24th, 1128, in a field near Guimarães, the young Afonso defeated his mother's army and established this region's independence. He declared himself king in 1139 and started to form what is now Portugal. A monument to Afonso Henriques is located at the entrance to the castle. Near the castle can be found the Palace of the Dukes of Braganza. This 15th century palace was built by the first Duke, Dom Afonso. Today, the palace stands as a museum to 15th century Portuguese aristocratic lifestyle. The Rua de Santa Maria with its wrought iron balconies and stone archways, is one of the oldest streets in Portugal. It leads to the Praça de Oliveira, which marks the spot where the 7th century Visigoth warrior, Wamba, was confirmed as king. According to legend, he said he would become king only if his staff sprouted olive leaves when he drove it into the ground. This church, Our Lady of the Olive Tree, was built in honor of this miracle. In front of this church, true to legend, is an olive tree. South of Guimarães is the province of Douro, which takes its name from the river along its southern border. The word Douro means of gold, but the real gold, however, are the grapes that grow on its banks. They produce Portugal's most famous ambassadors, port wines. The grapes that go into making port wine grow only on these hillside vines. The upper Douro Valley is located in the mountainous region of Portugal, which includes the provinces of Trás-os-Montes and Upper and Lower Beira. The mountains are responsible for the climate and soil that is ideal for grape growing. Countless hours of manual labor have been spent creating these terraced grounds. The port harvest usually begins in late September and lasts until early November. The wine process begins the minute the grapes arrive at the wineries located nearby. In the spring, the wine is transported by truck or rail to the wine lodges of Vila Nova de Gaia, a suburb across the river from Porto. In the past, the casks of young wine were brought downriver on square-shaped sailing boats known as barcos rebelos. These retired boats can still be seen moored on the Douro River. There are over 80 port lodges in Vila Nova de Gaia. They each contain large cellars where the wine is left to mature in large oak casks called pipes. Conditions in the cellars are strictly controlled to provide an optimal environment. Also, the blending of most ports takes place here. Wines from different vineyards and different years are carefully blended to produce a consistent port. These blended ports are the mainstay of the port industry, but the most famous are the vintage ports. Fatima Andrade of Sandeman explains the difference between a vintage and port wine.
In a vintage year, there's only a small part of the harvest will be the vintage wines. It is the best wine of the best years. So it won't be blended, it won't be mixed with different years because it's a very special, very good quality wine.
Once the blended wine has sufficiently matured, it is removed from the casks and bottled and boxed for shipment worldwide. Porto, the city which has given its name not only to the world-renowned wine, but also the country, is located at the mouth of the River Douro. The second largest city in Portugal, Porto is essentially a working city. Porto has been the hub of the lucrative port wine trade since the 18th century. It is also the center for the export of countless other industrial and agricultural products from this northern region. These products account for 2/3 of the nation's total exports. The business district surrounds the broad Avenida dos Aliados, located in the center of town. The street leads uphill to the town hall, an imposing neo-Renaissance structure which dominates its surroundings. West of the town hall rises the city's most prominent historical monument, the Torre dos Clérigos. This 18th century granite tower, with 6 floors and 225 steps, is the highest in Portugal. South of the tower is a twin-towered fortress-like cathedral. Built originally in the 12th century, it has since been greatly modified. Inside is a 14th century Gothic cloister wrapped in azulejo panels. A few blocks east of the cathedral is the 19th century Palacio de Bolsa. which houses the city's stock exchange. Its dazzling oval Arab room is modeled after the Moorish Alhambra in Granada, Spain. Just behind the Bolsa stands the Iglesia de San Francisco. Located along the riverbank, a few blocks southeast of the church, is the oldest part of the city, called Cais da Ribeira. The Ponte de Dom Luís directly links Porto to Vila Nova de Gaia. This two-story iron bridge was built by a disciple of the famous engineer, Alexander Gustav Eiffel. Despite its nickname as the City of Work, the people of Porto do find time to enjoy themselves. This is especially true during the city's main festival honoring St. John. Following years of tradition, the people take to the streets and hit one another teasingly with bundles of leeks and nowadays plastic hammers. Although it covers almost 1/3 of the country's total area, the Planicies region contains only about 500,000 people, making it the least populous part of Portugal. The Planicies region is comprised of the vast, rugged Alentejo province and the meadowlands of the smaller Ribatejo province. The market town of Santarém, capital of the Ribatejo, sits on the rocky hilltop overlooking the Tagus River. In the oldest part of town is the 14th century Graça Church, famous for this magnificent rose window. A short distance beyond is a splendid park, framed by old castle walls, the Portas do Sal. During the summer, Santarém hosts one of Europe's leading agricultural fairs. This fair is a showcase for the industry that provides a livelihood for 1/3 of the people of Portugal. The Ribatejo Fair, held at the same time, is a celebration of the proud people of the region. Portuguese journalist João Paulo Diniz talks about one such dance that is unique to this region.
Fandango is something very typical from this province of Portugal, Ribatejo, and so Fandango, it's a kind of a challenge between two men who are keen in the same movement. Those men, they try to do their very best in order to, to make the best of performance, to make some attraction to this young lady.
The main event of the fair is a spectacle which touches the soul of most Portuguese people, the tourada, or bullfight. It has been one of Portugal's most popular events since the 17th century. In Spain, the matador with his cape takes center stage. In Portugal, his counterparts, the peões de brega, are only bit players. The lead role goes instead to the cavaleiro. At the sound of a bugle, the cavaleiro enters the ring. The gate is open and the bull charges. The cavaleiro toys with the bull to enrage him further. In a series of strikes, he must plunge several darts into the bull's neck. The cavaleiro trains with his horse for many years until he is capable of the split-second timing necessary to achieve success. After the last dart has been placed, the cavaleiro exits to an applauding crowd. The next event of the bullfight is uniquely Portuguese. 8 men, called furcados, face the bull in a single file. The leader calls to the animal until it charges. He holds on tight between the bull's horns. It is then up to the remaining 7 to jump one after another onto the bull's back and slow the charge. Finally, the tail is grabbed and the animal is brought to a stop. The bull is then escorted out of the ring by a herd of steers. In Portugal's tourada, the bull is never killed. Southeast of Santarém, in the heart of the Alentejo region, is one of the oldest cities in Portugal, Evora. Surrounded by fortress walls, Evora stands as Portugal's foremost showpiece of medieval architecture. The Temple of Diana, dating from the 2nd or 3rd century. The facade and mosaic floor have disappeared, but most of the temple's original Corinthian granite columns have survived. Near the temple is the Sé, or cathedral. A mix of Romanesque and Gothic styles, its main portal is flanked by 2 oddly dissimilar towers. The apostles standing guard on either side of the church entrance are masterpieces of medieval Portuguese sculpture. The Largo das Portas de Moura is a small, serene square, a few blocks south of the Sé. The focal point of life in Evora is Giraldo Square. At the northern end of the square is the Church of St. Anthony, which was built during the 16th century. Nearby is the Loyush Church and Convent. It is now a state-owned inn, or posada. Posadas are a string of small showcase hotels around Portugal where an authentic taste of history and life of the country can be experienced. Each posada reflects furnishings, decor, and art objects that are typically unique to that region. There are 2 types of posadas, regional and historical. Regional posadas have been carefully selected in sites of exceptional natural beauty. Historic posadas are found in restored castles, convents, palaces, or fortresses. The posada cuisine is also a reflection of local traditions and ingredients. Posadas have acquired a well-deserved reputation for the quality of the wine and food they serve. On the road leading to Reguengos de Monserrate, a handicraft center east of Evora, a man creates baskets using techniques passed down from generations. In this handicraft center, coppersmiths toil away to produce their shiny wares. In the Fábrica Alentejana de Lenefícios, traditional hand-woven rugs are made. This factory is one of the few to keep the traditional craft alive. The results are rugs of superb quality and design, which are uniquely Portuguese. The landscape of the Alentejo region is studded with pine, eucalyptus, cork, and olive trees. Forestry is a major industry in Portugal. The pine and eucalyptus trees provide the industry's main output, pulp, along with other important products. The sprawling cork trees which are specifically distinctive to this region, supply more than half of the world's cork. At harvest time, workmen wield razor-sharp axes to skillfully strip the bark off the mature trees. Machines cannot replace the expertise of the strippers, who cut the bark with such skill that the tender trunk below is left undamaged. The trees are then dated, as it will be another 9 years before the bark can be harvested again. Separated by a chain of mountains is the southernmost region of Portugal, the Algarve. It is a region of almost endless sunshine. For centuries, the local economy revolved around farming and fishing. Recently, the area's increased popularity as a prime holiday destination has brought a new industry, tourism. The name of the region comes from the Arabic word Algarve, meaning the west. Other visible signs of the Moorish influence are the town names, which have the AL prefix, the whitewashed houses, which tradition rules have to be painted twice a year, and the traditional lattice chimneys which adorn these houses. Located in the heart of the region, the ancient city of Silvish served as a Moorish capital of the Algarve. A medieval atmosphere endures in Silvish. This castle was originally built during the 4th century BC. Moorish modifications greatly enhanced the structure and gave it its present form. The Sé of Silvish was built in the 13th century. Cleft windows, gargoyles, and pyramid-shaped battlements adorn the cathedral. The coastal capital of Algarve is the city of Faro, located southeast of Silvish. The Arco de Vila is the entrance to the city's old quarter. A few blocks north is located one of Faro's most beautiful churches, the Igreja do Carmo. The church's interior is richly decorated with 18th century carvings. Through a side entrance, the macabre Capella dos Ossos, or Chapel of Bones, can be found. This vault was constructed from the skulls and bones of monks and parishioners. Faro is the gateway to the rest of the Algarve. This region is well known for its pottery. In the town of Porches, west of Faro, local artisans paint as they have done for centuries. These artisans take great care in replicating popular designs, but since every piece is done by hand, each retains a distinct individuality. Beautiful, clean, sandy beaches. Along the coast, a short distance from the city of Portimão, is the most celebrated beach of the Algarve, Praia de Roca. Heading away from the coast, the countryside is sprinkled with small meadows. Alongside these meadows are groves of olive, fig, almond, carob, and citrus trees on which grow the main agricultural products of this region. Lagos is a coastal community with a rich history. It was the principal shipyard and port from which the first explorers began their voyages. Near the harbor is a statue of Prince Henry, the navigator who provided leadership for the early explorers. Although most of the buildings of this period were destroyed in the earthquake of 1755, one remnant of this golden age remains, the Igreja de Santo Antonio. The inside of this church is an exuberant masterpiece of carved wood and 18th century tiles. To the west, beyond Lagos, the coastline becomes poetically dramatic with high, rugged cliffs. For centuries, the Sagres Peninsula was thought of as the sleeping place of the gods. This promontory is where many believe Prince Henry set up his 15th century school of navigation. It is thought to have been a community of scholars who pooled their knowledge of map-making, shipbuilding, and mathematics. Here, the first voyages of discovery were planned. Evidence of this is the Fortaleza do Relish. Within these walls are stones laid out in the form of a large mariner's compass. Fishing has always played a major role in the commerce of Algarve. From the cliffs close by, men cast their long lines into the sea. A few miles down the road from the Fortaleza is the southwesternmost tip of Europe, the Cape of St. Vincent. Before the age of discovery, this point was thought of as the end of the world. Standing at the tip of the cape is the second most powerful lighthouse in Europe. This broad white tower, crowned in red, projects a beam 60 miles out to sea. As night falls, one of the most peaceful places on Earth can be found on the cliffs near the cape. Every evening, the sun plunges swiftly, dramatically, into the endless sea. Portugal is a land full of treasures waiting to be discovered.